Good afternoon. So happy to be here, and we have the cozy company, which is even better. My name is Roman. I work for Red Hat, but also I'm engaged in this lovely effort that we all call the CRA. I'm engaged in the standardization efforts and also in the multiple open source communities that try to navigate those complexities. Today, we're going to discuss the stewardship part and our journey, how Red Hat approaches it, and maybe all of you can get some inspirations afterwards. And of course, the CRA is so complex, and please don't take it as a legal advice by any means. And yes, some of the images are generated by AI, of course, during this presentation. Let's get straight into this. How many of you have seen this picture and love it? OK, that's our favorite one, right? So this is the intention of the CRA, right? To fix all these supply chain issues and supply chain bugs. Now, how it's intended to work? In the nutshell, manufacturers provide the PDEs, product digital elements, to customers and consumers. But manufacturers are all dependent on the third parties, including open source projects. But the reality is that the open source projects is not the one thing. There are many open source projects out there. And all of these open source projects need to keep up with updates, with fixes, with vulnerability fixes, and etc. And therefore, CRA recognized the special role of the open source software steward, who is meant to be helping or sitting to some extent in between of the manufacturers and open source projects. Now the manufacturers are supposed to support stewards or open source projects directly, probably with the fixes, maybe with an engineering resources, maybe with the money, etc., etc. Now everybody's happy because everybody supports each other, and we have fixes ready, we have secure products ultimately delivered to users, to customers, to businesses, to EU citizens, and worldwide. Now the question would be, yes, we are here for collaboration, which is good, which is the beauty of the humanity. We all work together. Now let's take a closer look from each of these actors' perspective to understand the gaps, and then how we can potentially fulfill these gaps. This picture is great, but what for actually manufacturers should necessarily support open source projects, right? What value they are getting back? Because manufacturers have their own thing in their mind, right? And what's in mind for manufacturers? Obligations, right? They need to fulfill the CRA obligations, because once the CRA in full force after December 2027, you will not be able to place or continue to produce your products on the market, right? You need to fulfill these obligations. And there are a lot. You can see the glass is full of obligations here in the picture, right? And they're asking a lot of questions. Some of these questions are easy. OK, disclaimer, none of them are really easy. But some of them are really tricky. For example, if I make a mistake or a security flaw is found in my project, will I get in trouble? Who is responsible for actual fixes? Is it the open source project or steward or somebody else on the supply chain who I can chase? Am I consider it as a manufacturer, for example, if I fund an open source project that is not under my responsibility? The very good question, if you remember this picture with the relationships and question marks, right? Even if we, as a manufacturers, want to support open source projects, what's in it for us, right? And what are the consequences? If I help a project, what guarantee do I get for my own conformity assessment? The perfect question. We kind of approach this the answer to these questions from multiple angles with the attestation and due diligence work. What is due diligence anyway, right? What does it mean? all of these questions and many more I actually asked, and a lot of them are already answered at the beautiful cra.rcwg.org/FAQ website. You can follow the link. You can scan the QR code and find the more questions and more important answers for you as a manufacturer, because you're not alone. Everybody actually asks this questions. Now, CRA obligations for maintainers. What's in mind for maintainers? How many obligations do maintainers have? Any guesses? 50? OK. 150? Any other guesses? 5. 0, exactly. If they don't monetize their projects, they have no obligations. But, right, we wouldn't be here if it were like that's bright. So, no obligations for maintainers, but they are also kind of scratching their head and asking the questions: am I subject to the CRA if I earn a living from the open source project I maintain? Most likely no, but this is a good question. And it's largely debated on the new draft guidance, and we don't still have the clear, 100% crystal clear answer to what extent they can, earn this money for their living. Can a solo maintainer be considered an open source software steward? Again, the good question. Probably no, but guidance is still in draft mode. Does the popularity of my open source project expose me to CRA regulations or to a steward? How can I communicate that I'm not subject to the CRA to downstream users, if I wish so, right? How I'm going to make them know that, don't treat me as your supplier. What additional obligations would I have if I had a steward, right? Maybe it's a good idea for me as a maintainer to kind of seek for stewards or to accept the stewardship offer from somebody, but what's in it for me and what are consequences? Again, all of these questions are asked and some of them answered at the FAQ work, which is a brilliant resource. Finally, stewards. Coming to our main topic about stewards. The stewards, they have just a few obligations and those so-called light touch regime, but the word is still in here. What's about the ENISA SRP, this thing, for example, for stewards, right? They need to figure it out along with the manufacturers. So that's why the kind of glass is not entirely full, but not entirely empty here. Some of other questions that they ask: who can be an open source software steward in general? Can you be a steward for your own code base or only someone else's? Will open source steward be expected to provide an sbom? Like, very direct and clear question. The answer is tricky, right? Probably no, but again. Is it possible for project to have multiple stewards? Super debatable question. Can I opt in or opt out from being a steward? And tons of other questions, again, on the FAQ. So this is kind of setting the stage to highlight that this picture is good, but we have all of these question marks that you can see on the slides. The system is supposed to work, but all of the actors on this slide, they ask their questions. And the most important point is they ask all different questions from their different perspective, and they have their own goals in mind, which need to be tackled somehow. How? On the previous Eclipse events, we highlighted our Red Hat's approach to the CRA in general. I'm not going to repeat this. Just a quick recap in 1 minute why Red Hat cares and why we're talking about the CRA at all. For certain reasons. First of all, we are a manufacturer because we are a provider of enterprise open source software that we sell globally, but of course on the EU market as well. Probably you are familiar with some of our products. We are a potential open source software steward, and most likely will be a steward, because we have a special relationships with open source software, and this is foundation for all our work. And we support countless the projects, including some of the most important and quite famous ones. And also, Red Hatters are contributors and maintainers. We every day provide the contributions. That's actually thousands of Red Hatters contribute to open source. So we are kind of embedded in this ecosystem, and that's why we are affected kind of from the multiple angles. And therefore, we decided we would like to actually navigate it nicely and would like to continue providing our support to projects, but also to ecosystem and to everybody else by jumping on to the efforts and working together within the open source communities like Eclipse Foundation, Linux Foundation, and others, and also standardization bodies to make sure we can advise and help the overall ecosystem to crack this nut. Now, going down to the stewardship. We decided that we are going to take the stewardship very seriously for us, and we outlined this 5-step approach to trusted stewardship, and that approach is kind of step by step because, again, remember the picture and all of the questions that everybody is asking. It's not quite clear, you know, what we're going to do, right? That's why we decided, OK, first, we're going to align on CRA roles and definitions, of course, between within the company, but also together with the communities that we work with. Then forge and clearly communicate our stewardship principles so that we kind of sign off under them and they're clearly communicated. Identify the projects that's most likely we're going to be stewarding and communicates this to them. Then define the scope for each project. I will be talking about this. And finally, tailor implementation guide, right? So those are five steps. Let's try to dive in each of them step by step and probably highlight some of the practices, pitfalls, and recommendations that we came up with following these processes. First of all, we are proud, and of course, we are very much providing sustained support to the open source projects, and moreover, we are committed to do so. We are committed to continue to do so, and therefore, stewardship is not really a choice. Yes, we have the definition. We have the legal definition under CRA that it means to be a steward for projects intended for commercial use. But in the nutshell, you can't opt in overnight or opt out overnight, because if you provide some sort of support, and on the slides, kind of examples of this support that is listed in the CRA text itself, a little bit in the FAQ and in the draft guidance. All the links to these materials are on the bottom on the slide, but you can easily Google them, released by EU Commission. Technical support, for example, hosting code and platforms, governing and steering development, contributing engineering resources. Or it could be non-technical support for projects that we also provide for some of them, like managing brands, helping organizing events, laying down governance rules, providing IT infrastructure. So sustained support means legal stewardship obligations. That's about it. And again, that needs to be clear, understood, and clarified. Now, to the principles. Those are, I call 7 principles of our stewardship that we think are instrumental as we work with open source projects. And I personally think that all stewards should kind of take the similar approach. First of all, listen first, act second. We recognize that all communities are such a diverse community and open source projects. There are no kind of equal open source projects. So we need to learn what are the community practices for each of them, and what the governance structure is, and then come up with a plan and then come up with the help, but not vice versa. So we listen first and then act upon the information that we get and learnings that we got. Security first, we wanted to prioritize security hygiene over the box checking exercise. Yes, we need to fulfill some certain obligations, but the improving security should be the end goal, and that is how we approach our own stewardship. Pragmatic and dev-centric requirements must make technical sense. I don't particularly like the words requirements when it comes to open source because, they have maintainers have no obligations, right? And we wanted to make sure that all of the best practices that we suggest or implement with the projects are kind of make sense and technical and aligns with the best practices and more importantly with the practices that those projects are following. Minimal disruption, efforts must be workflow native, ideally integrating seamlessly, and iteration also the key, right? We don't want to disrupt the normal kind of operations of the projects. This is key for success. Otherwise, we are going to be failing 100%. Gap filling supports, we provide resources only when necessary. Again, if there are good tools, good processes already in communities, and we witness that some of our communities are doing super fantastic, and that just works, right? Why we need to change anything? No point. And diversity and talent fit, I mentioned this briefly, no one size fits all. They're all very diverse and opinionated, and the unified kind of mandate is not working. And lastly, the champion steward for some of the projects, some of the big and important and famous projects, we decided to go beyond the minimal legal obligations because we wanted to promote quality and security practices, because we recognize that the overall ecosystem kind of research and look to these big projects, what they do, so that we want those projects to be inspirational for others. Now, how we decided, or not decided, but identified projects for this stewardship. That's a good question. I mentioned before, like sustained support is a main identification, but when you dive in, you probably need to ask more precise questions, and that's what we did. For example, is the project a product with digital element at all by the definition, right? Because something like documentation, for example, or research projects or the conference, something is not a PDE, and there is no point to this project is necessarily to do anything. Engineering resources, do we contribute engineering resources to the projects to ensure viability? Like the good question, and one of the most important question. Do we provide the majority, typically more than the half of the project governance to the project? If not, right, it's like questionable. Commercial association, is there any commercial products associated somehow with the project, or do we know if this project is used by the downstreams largely in commercial activity? Again, the good question to assess. Do we host the project development or collaboration platforms? Are we managing branding, for example? All of these questions we asked to hundreds and hundreds of projects that we assessed then to be identified for the potential scope of the stewardship for Red Hat. And the final question is actually very important. Is there a better potential stewards? During this exercise, we realized that some projects probably would have better potential stewards, or they do have already the steward, but Red Hat is so involved, and then we decided to work with those stewards to make sure they understand and what they think about it, and etc. So, and again, this is our approach just because we involved in thousands of open source projects and their development. We, of course, realistically can't and shouldn't be steward for everything, but we just took an extra effort to make sure we're scoping this right. And again, this is all for the help for the ecosystem and for the projects. Partnership is critical, right? I'm moving on to the next step, how to communicate these things and how to start working with the project. This is the actual screenshot. We do it publicly, so we communicated our kind of stewardship intention, in this case, to Fedora project. And actually, there were kind of conversation around it, right? We had a several meeting, but we also had a public conversation on the Forge about it, right? And this is just brilliant because we want to learn, we want to hear from ecosystem, from the project itself, from maintainers, from contributors, what they think would be the better approach, how to do it. Like the CRA is with us for quite some time, probably for forever, right? But it's kind of understood by the majority of people, but how we're going to approach this is the thing that we can change and we can actually must shape. And that's why we kicked off these open conversations instead of saying, hey, this is a mandate, do this, and that. The same thing we've done with Ansible, for example, also Red Hat supported projects. Like, hey, this is what we are going to do. This is the basics of the CRA. This is our plan. What do you think about it? What's your feedback? How to best work and collaborate together to achieve the common goal. So I think this kind of approach and partnership is really critical in order to move forward, because again, they're all diverse, they're all communities in itself. We want to make sure they are onboarded, and we do all the things reasonably. Given this framework and those kind of preparation steps and everything, we came up with a certain list of projects that we most likely will be steward for, and we are proud to be a steward for. We would really love to continue to support them on their journey. And you can, who knows Fedora, right? And who knows Ansible as well? So we are proud to be a steward for some of the well-known and widely used open source projects that everything is running on, right? So this is like, this is quite obviously the CRA thing, but also this is kind of responsibility for the overall ecosystem and for society, if you will. So our kind of roadmaps and whatever we come up with would be the stewardship plan for these projects, of course, dependent on our involvement on those. Previously, I mentioned all of these questions that we asked, right? And based on that, we identified like the two simple kind of chunk of support that we provide to the projects, and we call them modifiers. Development modifier, if we develop actual code, if we invest our engineering resources quite heavily to this project, and hosting modifier when we provide the underlying infrastructure. Of course, that's a mix and match of these supports for some of the projects, but for some of them, it's just one of the two, right? But in all of these cases, it's counted as a sustained support. And again, we would like to make sure that this sustained support is continue to go. And as I mentioned, this is all kind of all complex around this CRA, and our commitment is to consistently evaluate open source projects and make sure we steward in the right ones, right? And that could be changed in the future, but there are usual suspects that we all kind of raised our hands up. Quite obviously, we are going to support them moving forward, and we'll be proud to be a steward for those projects. So that's our selection process. That's our approach. That's how we did it. Now the next question would be, OK, let's dive into the certain projects. And I will bring only one example, but you probably can get an idea. It is the halfway or part of the job to identify, OK, this is like Fedora or Ansible or whatever, like big project we are student for. But this is actually the screenshot of Fedora project kind of chart. These names are organizational chart, but this gives you an idea about the diverse ecosystem of Fedora projects. Right? There are a lot of the repositories, a lot of the different pieces that are connected to Fedora projects, and that are united by the kind of common Fedora project governance and et cetera, et cetera. So that's just a lot. And this is, of course, the kind of small representation, the small picture. So that's a lot, right? How do we want to go about this, right? And we decided we need to actually take care of what matters most and what makes sense to care of, asking the following questions, and questioning what should be in scope. Quite obviously, the source code, right? The development platforms, hosting platforms, systems, infrastructure. So all of these things should be in scope, and some of them are already mentioned in the CRA itself and in the Commission draft guidance, kind of clarifying what should be or could be those things that would be in scope. Out of scope, for example, unfinished code, samples, demos, unfinished software, pure documentation, or abandoned repos that are no longer maintained and probably are archived, probably not, but they're no longer maintained, and there are no there is no kind of association with a product or something. So those would be probably out of scope. Now going down to the interesting things, guidelines. So again, I don't particularly like the words requirements or obligations or something like that when it comes to open source project, because you know what? Maintainers don't owe, they owe nothing, right? So the guidelines. And we thought a lot about the guidelines, and we came up with two things. First, that we call lighter basic requirements to satisfy the stewardship obligations for Red Hat as a steward. Right? And that largely goes down to these three things that are written in the CRA text itself. We don't have that much other clarification what that means, so we kind of stick with what we read in the law. Security policy, vulnerability management process that should be accompanied by ability to report actively exploited vulnerabilities, and incident response process that should go hand by hand with ability to report severe incidents to local CSORs and ENISA. There is also a cooperation thing, of course, but this is not necessarily like what projects need to do. We, of course, fully committed to cooperate with authorities here and there. But those three things we identified as the three major areas that we will work with each of the projects to improve security posture, but also to help to satisfy stewardship obligations. Now, that's not really a lot, and you can ask the question, you talked about the good security practices. Here we go. The next bucket of the guidelines or recommendations would be that we call the champion stewardship, and we wanted to be the champion steward for the certain projects. We wish we can implement all of these practices for all of the projects, right? But at least for those that are very well known and critical and etc. SBOMs. I mentioned SBOMs, and somebody raised their hands like, no, this is not a requirement, but we think that SBOMs would be quite instrumental for the ability to report vulnerabilities, especially at scale, right? So that's why it's on the first place for the champion requirements or the best practices, and we'll try to make sure that this piece exists, and we kind of help to create this for all the projects. Now, security self-assessments, which is the machine-readable format, machine-readable spec. I will have an example later on to actually express what security practices open source project implements. Contributing guidance, quite important. It could contain security part, but it's also kind of important to in order to say how you make development, what's your life cycle, and etc. etc. Release documentation is very important. Defect reporting guide, MFA, multi-factor authentication, branch protection, license files. Not all of the projects out there have license files so far, which is kind of fascinating to see, but still, it is very important, we think. Also, we think that for the when it comes to the best security practices, the well-established framework at the moment, for example, SALSA, which stands for secure layers for software artifacts. It was for the builds initially, but then it was extended to the source as well. But for the builds itself, we wanted to have these SALSA attestations done. Signing commits will be a good practice as well, which we already implementing and rolling out across some of the projects. OpenSSF, open source project security baseline. I would like to make a caveat here, and I hear these questions quite frequently. Kind of having your baseline controls implemented at any level doesn't mean that you're compliant with the CRA, quote unquote, but it is just the good security practices that complements at least the spirit of the CRA, and most likely, as you implement all of those, your kind of security posture will be in line with the CRA and will significantly help to fulfill any requirements. Not equal to be sure you kind of get all of them, but the excellent security practices. And OpenSF best practices badge, that's also a nice thing to have. This is basically the justification that the projects kind of self-attested to the certain controls. And it has the nice GitHub page that you can put to the repo, for instance. So this is not the full list, but I think the majority of the practices that we would like to see from actually any open source projects to be implemented. Now we work with each project to create a tailored CRA readiness roadmap, which is quite important because I mentioned to you all the projects are different. They're all, not all of them, but they somehow use the different tools, the different source control systems, different build systems, different whatever, right? And you know, it's impossible to say do this, this, and that, and this is the tool set. That could be slightly different for all of them. So we are implementing the tailored CRA readiness roadmap. Therefore, again, you know, we are not insisting on, you know, take this tool, take this, take that. And this is kind of unlike some other stewards do things, especially the foundations that they run projects, because some of them have their ecosystem established and their tool set established uniformly for all of the projects, and they kind of can get this. But you know, all of our projects, they have slightly different tool set, right? And that's why we just don't have this simple table, you know, use this tool, use that tool. That's kind of, that took some time for us actually to learn to communicate and to work on with each individual project. And finally, for the timeline, probably you are wondering, you know, what the timeline is for this. We decided to align timeline with the obligations for manufacturers, right? It is for reporting part, and then it is the full compliance. We, of course, aim to fulfill everything as soon as possible, but at least to align with the manufacturer's obligations. Now implementing or kind of communicating the CRA readiness, again, there's still unclear how and, you know, whether to communicate your CRA readiness posture, and of course the attestation work that is happening, for instance, and due diligence work that is happening under Eclipse or C working group, which I'm very proud to be part of, kind of will probably clarify the different specs and, you know, the white papers and the standards how to do this, but simply the checklist would be enough as a starting point, right? It's just a simple markdown checklist. You know, I done this, and that. To be a little bit advanced using the tools that exist right now, again, I mentioned we are working on the different ways and different recommendations how to do it for projects. But already now, under OpenSSF security insight specification in the form of YAML file that you can actually document some of the things in it in machine-readable format. Right, so that could be kind of advanced machine-readable format, but I think that would be kind of essential in our upcoming agentic AI world, right? So that we can empower some of the agents to pick up the information in machine-readable format as well. Not to talk about automation that already exists in place for many of the companies. So this is kind of how to simply document that you have done actually the good things in alignment with the CRA. It's super important to know that those best practices don't transfer CRA responsibility. It's crucial, and it's fascinating how many questions I personally receive from that regards from either open source projects or users or manufacturers out there. Therefore, it is kind of recommended to also put some of the disclaimer to your repo if you're a maintainer. That this is the voluntary thing that the project decides to do, and if you have any questions, you can either find our stewards if it exists or just go away, right? But we owe nothing to you. And this disclaimer and some of the other tips and tricks for maintainers you can find at just recently published, I think it was yesterday, kind of release announcement at this stage. Maintainers guideline at the openssf.org website. So you can find the not that big, I think few pages document what the voluntary security practices make sense to implement, right? So check it out if you will. Now, obligations for maintainers. Right, non-legally, but practically, friction is real, right? As we all understand, friction is real. And the maintainers, how many of us maintainers in the room? OK, I have a few. Very good. At least probably you have heard, if not received directly, some of the questions by strangers on the internet, right? Are you CRA compliant? Or as part of our audit, here's the issues we found in your open source project. We give you 1 month to fix or to respond. Or I want it to be open source stewards. So these kind of requests for open source projects, questioning compliance posture, and etc. Recommendations are collaborate. Consider this an opportunity. If there is something that you think they can help you, express it. Maintain autonomy if you wish. None of the open source projects have to have a steward, right? So I mean, this is there's no obligations for maintainers to actually have a steward. And make a gentle response. Again, the good recommendation how to do it is on the CRA or C working group org FAQ. Right? How to communicate, I'm not your supplier. I have no obligations. Provide a gentle response. I mean, don't be overreactive. It is what it is. And don't sign anything as a maintainer. Right? Don't sign any declarations and etc. It's kind of obvious, but still make sure you don't get yourself in the trouble unnecessary. And what I just described, and generally, what we do here in Red Hat and what we do as a community, we do is in upstream, right? And all of those things that I just told you during my presentation are not coming out of the blue. We have been working together with different communities, working group, and of course, we contributed and then been inspired back by the open source software stewardship white paper that you can access by this link. Also, we worked within the OpenSSF under Linux Foundation on the stewards playbook, which also has some of the good recommendations that then we applied to our stewardship approach. And yeah, that is our approach. I can try to promise you that we're going to publish what we have done as a paper publicly for everybody, like a document. But now you can read the blog, how we in general approach the stewardship. But hopefully later on in the year, we will be releasing the whole document, the whole guidance, how we kind of communicate it to the projects and what we have done, and I've just described to you. Alrighty, and lessons learned. And I would say so far, because we are just at the start of the journey, right? It's like really not clear, but pitfalls, lessons, what we've learned. First of all, most people don't understand the CRA. I started my presentation with like, the majority of us have heard about this, and all of our maintainers that we communicated with kind of heard about the CRA, but nobody understands what that means exactly. Be patient, be simple, be mindful to people. We need to explain, we need to work together, we need to listen and ingest feedback, because our mutual understanding, not only ours as a stewards, actually shape the further approach. Respecting each community practices is the only way to sustainable success. I've been talking about that quite extensively. Each community is diverse, and we need to accept their processes, their practices, and work out of this. Not invent the wheel and say, hey, now we do this, and that's like out of the blue. Mandating security controls without community buy-in backfires, right? That's why we've done this communication. That's why we try to work proactively. There will be more than one styles and types of stewardship. We figured out that we are different from the foundation, for example, how to approach all of these things. And yes, legal obligations can be transferred to projects themselves. Kind of obvious, but it should be clearly stated or clearly communicated. And this is kind of lessons learned, again, some of the things. And finally, there are many unknowns, right? Chop wood, carry water, iterate. So this is what we need to do in order to be successful. Now, remember this picture and all of these people that's supposed to be happy, right? And all of these question marks. And our answer to this is how to do it. The trust is key for success. That's the main takeaway that we found along our stewardship way, actually. Trust is priceless, and it's super hard to earn. But we need to do it, and then we need to make sure that we will not lose it. Join community collaboration to continue building trust. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Roman. We have time for one question, if any. It looks like people is hungry and thirsty, and we have the break now. But
what I'm wondering is about patching. In the CRA, there is some words about patching. From the project source to the final application. First question here is, as Red Hat, do you recompile or do you compile all those projects that are part of your applications? When you do that, I see it's easy to patch. And the second question here would be, is patching and building the task of the steward or the task of the manufacturer? I see you both are Red Hat, but is it under the head of steward or under the head of manufacturer?
Yeah, the perfect question, and they kind of connected all of these two questions. The first question, we need to distinguish between the manufacturer and the steward, right? We have the commercial products that we put on the market, and for those, there is a different process that was not subject of this presentation. Of course, we're going to be fulfilling the manufacturer obligations for those products, including patching and everything, right? That's for the product. For the open source projects that are not commercial products and that are kind of purely community maintained, that would be the responsibility at the end of the day of the maintainers to do this. But the beauty of the stewards and the expectation of the stewards that they're going to be facilitate this thing. I see nothing bad if the engineers from the big companies like Red Hat, Microsoft, Google, and other companies out the world, like, kind of go ahead and contribute these patches and this work to the open source project themselves. But then those fixes will be incorporated into the source and will be packaged by the open source project itself, not by Red Hat, right? So that's for Fedora, for example.
And how do you verify an SBOM, for example, that the binary contents really are built out of this one Git commit ID that is told to be part in the binary? Don't you recompile everything?
That I think that depends on the project, right? And within Fedora, for example, we kind of package everything on Fedora side, right? And there are, as you know, many types of SBOMs, and with the open source projects, as a Red Hat as a company, we publish all the SBOMs, all the built SBOMs to be precise publicly. You can find them on our website. For the open source projects, we are still navigating how to do it better, especially for these large, enormous projects like Fedora, and how to connect those dots. As a manufacturer, we do our own things for years, I think, already. For these open source projects, it's still yet to be navigated.
Maybe the right buzzword here are reproducible builds. So if you implement reproducible builds, it's easier to follow up if the SBOM is actually for that artifact.
Yeah, exactly, and we think about this as well, along with other distributions and in the community. But I can't commit to it right now. But this is one of the approaches that we're looking into. Thanks, good questions.